In DaVinci Resolve 19, the cut, the color, and the edit pages all have this handy button that are in the upper right to quickly export your timeline using any of these presets. And they totally work, but they're not always going to look the best. And what if you spend a lot of time working on a video? You want it to look the best it can be with the smallest file size for uploading to YouTube, even after YouTube runs its own compression on it. Oh, and there's this checkbox that might be worth unchecking for reasons that I want to talk about towards the end of the tutorial today. Hey, today I'm going to teach you how to create an export preset along with a few other compression and resolution concepts that I think you need to know for Resolve. Chapters are marked, so let's get started. The first concept I want to talk about is timeline resolution and how that works, because your timeline resolution directly impacts what you're able to deliver from the deliver page without losing any quality. So when you first create a new project in DaVinci Resolve, under the File menu, you've got your project settings, and these are sort of defaults for your whole project. The default that most people use, and it's what I suggest, is that your timeline resolution is set to 1920 by 1080. This will give you better performance when you use higher res footage. For instance, this tutorial right here, this was shot with H.265 3840 by 2160 footage, and if I were to export it directly as this is, as the defaults right now, and go to deliver page, and I change my resolution here to 3840 by 2160, and say add a render queue, you are going to get this error box. It's not an error box, but it's explaining to you what I'm explaining right now. If you have 4K footage on a 1080 timeline, go to deliver page and try to export 4K, you're essentially down-resing your footage and then up-resing it again, which is going to look soft and mushy. It's not what you want. So I will hit cancel here, and I'll show you how to deal with this. I do suggest you work at 1080 because you're going to get better performance, but before you go to export, either go to your file project settings area, master settings, and change your timeline resolution right before you go to that deliver page, hit save, and doing that automatically updates your default timelines, which are the ones over here that do not have the gear cog on them. So if I right click on here, say timeline settings, you can see this now has changed to 3840 by 2060. Now I can go over here, export 4K, and you're good. So there's also timeline settings that can be overridden, and they're disjointed from those default project settings that are set under this menu right here. And the way, like I said, the way you know that they've been divorced from the project settings is they get this little gear cog icon. There's something different about those. So that's a different way you can work as well. So if you want to leave your defaults always alone at 1080, you can do that and then just come in and manually change one of these different here to say timeline settings and uncheck this use project settings checkbox right here. And here you can change resolution, you can make vertical versions and all that. Output color space. This is a major topic when people see gamma shifts when they export their video files. Under the File menu, we're going to go back to our project settings, and I go to the Color Management tab. This doesn't matter if you're using DaVinci YRGB or DaVinci YRGB Color Manage. Output color space is intended to be what monitor are you looking at to make your color judgments. I'm using a Flanders Scientific monitor that is calibrated to Rec. 709 Gamma 2.4. If you're looking at a Mac laptop computer screen, you wouldn't set this to Gamma 2.4 here because it's nowhere near that gamma. For a Mac, you might set this to Rec. 709A, and the default the Blackmagic engineers put in here is actually Rec. 709 Scene. And the reason they set that to Rec. 709 Scene is because when you go to export without doing anything else, it will apply the proper 1-1-1 gamma tag so that you don't have any weird color shifting that happens. Now, if you set this to Gamma 2.4, if you're a pro, and that's how I have mine set up because I'm looking at a calibrated display, there is another setting you want to override on the deliver page, and we'll get there towards the end. Just know your output color space is what am I viewing this thing on? While we're talking about this topic, because I know so many of you use a Mac with a Mac display, if you set this to Rec. 709A here, which is right here, and you hit save, there is one other setting that you might want to be aware of on your monitor, and that's a preference setting under the DaVinci Resolve Preferences, General Settings, and that is Use Mac Display Color Profiles for Viewers. If you check that, hit save, it says it's got to restart, but it doesn't really. Your viewer over here will update so that when you export, it should match pretty closely to the viewer that's on here. Now, yes, I know Rec 709A is not an actual standard, but it is a way if you have a Mac with a Mac display to get consistent results from this viewer to your output QuickTime up to YouTube. And this is just one little word of warning for my friends that are going to use the Use Mac Display Color Profiles for Viewers checkbox here. And that's that when this is enabled and running, your viewers over here in the edit page are looking through an ICC profile, but the downside to that is your color picker, if you're using like text that needs to match a specific brand or some background solid, that's actually sampling through the filter, so you're actually getting the wrong color with the color picker. So if you ever use that tool, it's really important that you disable Use Mac Display Color Profiles for Viewers, or you do all your color sampling in Fusion, which ignores this altogether. Subtitles and chapter markers are a great way to make your video more accessible for anyone on YouTube. So how do we use them? How do they work? Well, a couple little gotchas. I think the first most important thing to pay attention to is I've already got my subtitles created here because it does take a second. But if you have the studio version, you can create them automatically under the timeline menu and choose Create Subtitles from Audio. And essentially it just listens to the video and it creates them for you. In fact, you can go and let's say it spelled a word wrong or something. You can come in here and fix the text at any point and edit these just like their other clips. But the default, and the thing I want to point out here, is the default when you create a new timeline in DaVinci Resolve is it starts at hour 1. And your subtitle tracks and the timeline kind of need to start at 0 for this all to work properly. So to change your time code of the timeline to not start at hour 1, you right click on your timeline, go to timelines, and instead of timeline settings this time, we choose starting timeline or starting time code. And then from here, we can just come over and say 0, 0 instead of 0, 1. Click OK, and you can see this is now set to 0, 0, 0. Now, you're not going to want to do this every single time. So there's a default preference, a user preference that we can change. So every time you make a new timeline, it starts at 0. Where is that? Let me show you. Under the DaVinci Resolve menu, Preferences, I'll go to User, then Editing, and then starting time code for new projects or new timelines in here. We'll just change this so that it is set to 0, 0, 0 across the board. I'll just hit return and hit save. And so anytime I make a new timeline, it'll be set to that. So I've got a 30-minute timeline here with all these chapter markers that are going to be accessible on the deliver page and in a file that we export to get the metadata for YouTube as well. How do we create them? Just hit M to create a timeline marker, hit M again, and that calls up this window. We can set the name, and we could just call this chapter marker demo right here, and hit return or click the done button. And that chapter marker will be included. How do we export the chapter markers? Well, there's 2 different ways to do that for the YouTube part of it, and I'm gonna show you both. One is if you right click on the timeline itself, go to timelines, and then you say export, you can say timeline markers to EDL. As soon as I do this, we're gonna put this like you do on any tutorial on the desktop. And this is a timeline markers EDL. Let's see, it's exported. And it's, if I go to my desktop, it's right there. It's just a text file. And the way you would use this file is there's this amazing good friend of mine, Bill Justice. He has this website, and I'll show you the link right there. It's billjustice.com/YouTube-chapter-generator. What this allows you to do is you can take this EDL file, just drag and drop it into here, and this does a reformat so you can copy and paste these chapter markers and place this into your YouTube description easily. And this is free. Obviously, you can buy him a coffee and help support him. He does amazing things. Now, there's another tool out there as well that uses an OTIO file to get your chapter markers from your timeline. And I'll show you that because it's another way to do it. I want to show you all the ways. I'm going to right-click on the timeline this time. Instead of saying to export a timeline markers to EDL, this time I'm going to export a timeline file. The timeline file that I'm going to export is not the standard DaVinci Resolve .drt file. Instead, I'm going to choose the OTIO file type down here, and then we'll put this one on the desktop as well. I'll hit save, and this time I'm going to use a paid app called Creator's Best Friend, and you can get this from the App Store. If you're on Windows, I don't know if this will work, so I just want to show you different ways of doing that. Click Open File. And this is essentially kind of doing the same thing as Bill Justice's website, where I get this list right here. I can copy to clipboard and then paste this into YouTube description. And then you have the ability to jump to any of these chapters. And you can come in here and just delete ones that you don't want. right? So that is exporting chapter markers from the timeline. Now, we need to get to the deliver page. I promised you I'm going to show you my deliver page export settings. I just want to mention one last thing before we get there, and that's that on the color page, if you need to reduce file size, one thing you can do is apply noise reduction. So if you have the studio version of Resolve, which this is a great reason to get DaVinci Resolve, is this motion effects tab here. These temporal and spatial noise reduction are really, really good. If you reduce the noise in your footage, it's a way that you can actually decrease the amount of bandwidth that's needed to get a good compression. I do want to say, while using these temporal and spatial noise reduction features built in here to DaVinci Resolve will make your file look cleaner on the initial output, when it gets recompressed by YouTube, it goes down to 8 bits, and sometimes you get more banding and subtle gradients than you might want. So use this, with a subtle taste, and maybe not use it at all. I would say try for yourself. Maybe it'll help you out, maybe it won't, but let's get to the deliver page, and I'll go over our custom settings now. Take a look up here. Let's all get started by clearing out whatever settings you had before. Just click YouTube 1080p, and then click H.265 master, because we're going custom. We're going to make this as best as possible. If you don't have a newer Mac that has hardware encoding built in, like an M1 Silicon Mac or newer, or maybe a PC with an NVIDIA GPU, just come over here and use the H.264 master, and that's going to get you pretty close. Won't be quite as good, but right now I'm in the H.265 world. That's a good reason to get a new computer. Now, in the deliver page, the first thing, once we go down this list here, is we have ability to render a single clip, which is the entire timeline as one video, which is what we want, or individual clips. Make sure you have single clip selected. And one thing that's often overlooked is you can export just certain sections of a timeline as well. You don't have to export everything. Sometimes you have some extra work that's at the tail end you don't want included. So under this area down here at the bottom where the timeline is, you can change this, instead of saying entire timeline, change this to in and out range. And on the deliver page, especially for this tutorial, I'm just going to mark the first maybe minute or so of this video rather than all 30 minutes to export that. I go back to the deliver page and you'll see just that's marked. So just that part will get exported. All right, so we have a video tab, an audio tab, and a file tab. Why don't we work backwards today? So I'm going to start with file tab because I want to encourage you to use what's the timeline name in your render. And the reason why timeline name is essentially just going to take the file that's in the name of your timeline that's in your bin right here. So reference Fusion Comps for Screen Inserts version 3. The reason I suggest you use timeline name when you export timelines is because if someone exports it and someone else needs to go in and make a change later on, or maybe it's even you weeks later, it's your reference of how do I know where that timeline came from? It's because it matches what's in the project. So timeline name, that's all you need to do there. Audio tab. YouTube will tell you compressed audio is fine, but you can actually give it uncompressed audio as well, and audio doesn't take up a huge part of the stream. So I like to change the codec, instead of saying compressed AAC to linear PCM. And then the rest of this section here is nice and good. Now that that is good, we'll go to the video tab and work through stuff here. Format, I like QuickTime. A lot of people say MP4. The reason I like QuickTime is it carries extra metadata for us, and I like that. So timecode, NCLC tags, chapter markers, all that stuff is much better to work with a QuickTime wrapper than MP4, and YouTube accepts it, so I use it. Codec. Again, we talked about we're doing H.265. There's a lot in here, but H.265 is going to give you the best quality at a given bit rate. In fact, the settings I'll show you here are just about as good as if you were to upload a ProRes HQ file to YouTube instead, but with much smaller file sizes. I will choose hardware acceleration if available. That's the whole point of having a nice GPU or a newer Mac, is it's going to crank it out really fast. If you see weird glitches though, you can uncheck this and it'll use just the software's CPU, and you will get a different result sometimes. So if you run into some weird glitches, try that off. But for most of the time, I want to leave that on. And the rest of the stuff down here is basically good to go. We have a new option that pulls the timeline resolution. So that means if you make a vertical version, it's going to update here for you. I'll leave this alone. Just again, make sure you change your timeline resolution either on the timeline settings or on the project level settings so that you're seeing the right number here and you're not doing any downscaling and upscaling. Frame rate, this should just be whatever the majority of your footage is for YouTube. So if most of it's 24, make it 24. If it's 30, and so on. We're going to go down here a little bit further, and chapter markers, chapters from markers. We do want to choose this. We've spent the time marking up our timeline with chapters, and it lets you choose a different color. Blue's the default. I just go with that. Now, the thing to know about the chapters from markers here is this is not going to apply to your YouTube video that you upload automatically. You do need to export the OTIO file or the EDL file that I mentioned in the previous chapter of this tutorial, and you paste that manually into YouTube. This chapter markers is going to bake it into the QuickTime file so that you can watch on QuickTime and jump between chapters on QuickTime Player, or bring it back into DaVinci Resolve and have the markers pre-laid out so you can find something. It's great for educational content. Going down further, we have quality. This is what's going to actually impact the file size the most, actually pretty much all of it. And we're going to change, instead of being automatic, we'll choose restrict to, and instead of being 10,000, we're going to change this to 80. And a big reason why is because YouTube's going to recompress it afterwards anyway. So I'm going to type in 80000, and this is a good rule of thumb for pretty much any HD or 4K content that you want to get out there as like a master that's not a ProRes master, which is your typical master. This is going to be retaining most of the quality for you, and that's just what I use. Now, as we go down here a little bit further, I leave the rest of this as default, main 10, except for one option here, and that's the frame reordering box right here. So what frame reordering is there's iframes, B frames, and P frames when you do long gap compression, which is what this is. And the B frames are the frames that look ahead and behind. So frame reordering is just another name for it here. I have found with frame reordering turned on, I have issues with QuickTime when I have the Apple computers doing the hardware encoding. So I turn this off. And what happens when I turn that off is, yes, your quality may change very slightly, but I really can't see a difference, is I actually get QuickTime to show every frame when I click through it in QuickTime Player. So let me show you. If I open up QuickTime right here, this file right here has no B frames that was exported, and if I use the arrow keys to step through, I'm seeing every frame as I go through, right? I have another one here as well that has B frames, or the with frame ordering box checked, which is going to be that default. And if I step through this in QuickTime, you'll notice as I go through, oh, wait, I'm moving frames, but it's not showing those. You can see down here, I'm moving frames, but it's not showing the change. And so when YouTube takes it, it seems to not be an issue. If you load it back into DaVinci Resolve, this file is not an issue. But a lot of times I need the QuickTime file to look correct for producers. So the short answer for me at least is I disable frame reordering on my preset. The other thing we want to look at next is going to be the gamma tag. Gamma tag is going to be to assign in QuickTime Player that 111 tag on output. So if I hit Command-I on the file, go to video details, you can see the code points 1111. That middle tag 1, which is the gamma part of that, is held right here. And so the reason I want to explicitly change our gamma tag here is, if you look at this, if it's set to same as project, it will look at whatever your project settings were for your output color space, meaning your monitor. I use a gamma 2.4 monitor, and that's not going to give me a 111 tag. So to force the 111 tag, you can change this here to one of two options. You have Rec 709, Rec 709A. Both of those are going to give you a 111 tag. We'll just choose Rec 709 to keep it simple. I'll go down here a little bit further, and we'll take a look at the subtitle settings. So toggle your subtitles if you're not seeing them right now. Choose export subtitles as a separate file, yes. SRT, yes, but not that SRT. There's a little drop down. We're going to choose SRT without formatting for YouTube, and you do need to check the box, and you probably will need to come in and turn this on every single time, even after we save this as a preset. Okay. To save as a preset, the 3-dot options menu at the top will say save as new preset, and we'll call this demo preset. I'll hit return, and now you can always come up here, and this will recall this every single time. Add to render queue, puts it in your render queue, and then we'll start rendering. And obviously you choose a destination in the browse section. I have it going to the desktop to speed this up, and you'll see it's created the SRT for us. And in just a second, we'll have the video exported because it's using hardware acceleration. So here's our exported file. If you click right here, we can see we have different chapters from the section I had chosen to jump around quickly to another section. Or if I bring it back in, it will have those chapters available. And the last little piece I want to point out here is that now that you have a preset saved and loaded in here, we called this one demo preset, from the edit page, you can kind of skip a lot of this step and just say, I want to export all of these timelines here by right-clicking and saying timelines, add to render queue using demo preset. It's going to ask me where do I want them. I'll put them on the desktop location. I'll go to the deliver page, and you'll see this has populated the render queue with those settings already applied. If you need to change them at any time, you can click this pencil icon and make any adjustments to make sure that, if you need to make a change, maybe you need to make a smaller version or whatnot. Hey, I'm Chadwick if you're new here. I am so pumped that you spent the time hanging out with me today. If you want to learn how you can render using another computer on your network so you can keep working on your main workstation while the render is actually happening, check out the video I have on screen on remote rendering somewhere on screen right now. And because there's so much more to learn, I'll see you in the next video.